thank you all for your interest and your presence. And I'd also just like to acknowledge on behalf of everybody, the traditional custodians of this whole land, the care that they've taken over such a long period of time, the knowledge acquired, the sensitive approach that has resulted in this incredible biodiversity. So as stewards today, let us all try and do our own bit. And today we've got Julia Franco from Nillumbik Council, terrific lady, biodiversity officer, and she'll be talking to us about all sorts of different things which relate to the Great Southern BioBlitz. And the Great Southern BioBlitz this year, we're really trying to bring a focus to your backyards for many reasons, and we'll be offering a forum specifically about that in the next few weeks, and we'll keep you posted. But in the meantime, over to Julia, and thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. That's lovely. I'll just share my screen and welcome all. How does that look? Okay, so firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples, the traditional owners of the country on which Nillumbik is located and where I'm also located as well. And I'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all First Nations people. And I respect the enduring strength of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So welcome tonight. My name is Julia Franco, as Vicky said, and I'm the Biodiversity Officer at Nillumbik Shire Council. I've been at Nillumbik for about 10 years in this role. I have a passion for plants and I've worked in the industry for about 20 years now. And tonight I'm presenting on the biodiversity in Nillumbik. And so I'm going to talk about biodiversity, including some key species, as well as some species that you may not have heard about before, and some ways in which we can all help to improve the lungs of Melbourne. So look at this, aren't they really cute? And isn't this beautiful? It's the Rosella spider orchid. Wouldn't you be happy to see this in your backyard? I know I certainly would. But what about this slimy looking thing? Well, some people would squirm at the look of this. And I actually got asked if it was a baby snake. But actually this species is quite cool. It's called a two-tone planarian. And I'll be honest, I don't know much about planarians, but this species is a terrestrial one. And some of them are aquatic. Most of them are carnivorous night feeders, eating protozoans, tiny snails and worms. So they form a really important ecosystem function, keeping these species in check. Now, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that biodiversity isn't always cute or beautiful or cuddly. It can be really inconspicuous, intricate, variable, and really gross. But all together, they form a really delicate balancing act. So what is biodiversity? Well, biodiversity is the variety of all life forms on Earth, the different plants, animals and microorganisms, and the ecosystems of which they are part. And biodiversity is measured at three main levels. We have genetic diversity, which is the variety of genetic information contained in all living things. It varies within and between populations of organisms that make up a single species or wider groups. We also have species diversity, which is the variety of all species on Earth, and ecosystem diversity, which is a variety of Earth's habitats, ecosystems, and ecological processes. So what does biodiversity in Nillumbik look like? Well, Nillumbik Shire supports a really diverse array of species and habitats. It's spanning the taller manna gum forests on the Yarra River, the grasslands on the Plenty River, alluvial plains and terraces, creeklines and dry valleys nestled amongst skeletal sedimentary hills, up to the Kinglake Plateau on the Great Dividing Range. Now, our local environment is essentially a dry eucalypt woodland, and a large proportion of Nillumbik is covered with remnant Indigenous vegetation in a range of types and conditions. but the main vegetation classes that we find in the Shire are grassy dry forest, valley grassy forest, heathy dry forest, and herb-rich foothill forest. But as you can see in these photos, biodiversity can occur anywhere. And even though a large proportion of Nillumbik is covered with remnant Indigenous vegetation, biodiversity doesn't just occur in our most diverse bushlands. It can be found in various forms on our agricultural areas, our gardens and backyards, and even in the most urban areas of Nillumbik, as well as in our homes and within our own bodies. However, don't worry, I won't be discussing our microbiomes in this presentation tonight. We have a really wide range of plant species that can be found in Nillumbik, from the large long-lived trees, such as our yellow box here, and to tiny, delicate, short-lived herbs, such as this species, which is a slender stalwart. Nillumbik also supports a really high diversity of animal species, which occupy various habitats. Nillumbik's fauna ranges from the more common species that may be seen around residential areas and semi-rural areas, such as the brush-tail possum, sugar glider and rainbow lorikeet, to the rarely seen inhabitants of the forest, such as common dunnart, lace monitors, and brush-tail phascogale. We also have a really rich diversity of insects, bryophytes, fungi, which both observable above and below the ground, that form important ecosystem functions to those species around them. So here I've got pictured a jewel spider and also a wood rotting fungi with some bryophytes on a log. Now, this is probably the nicest looking spider I could tolerate, as I don't particularly like spiders, but they do form a really important function in our environment. Now, this little spider can get together with others from the same species and could create huge webs that capture flying insects. Can you imagine the mosquitoes and flies we would have without spiders? Similarly, with the wood-rotting fungi, such as this fungi here, which I think is a mycena, and that's why I've got a question mark next to the name, these species help to break down wood and recycle those nutrients, which makes scant resources available to the other species that are around them. So, what makes biodiversity in Nillumbik unique? Well, we have approximately 1,325 Indigenous flora species that have been recorded within Nillumbik. And the distribution of these plants is determined by environmental factors such as soil type, rainfall, hydrology, and topography. However, a number of the plants found in Nillumbik are really rare or threatened. And this includes 62 species that are listed as threatened in Victoria, either critically endangered, or vulnerable, and 9 species listed as endangered or vulnerable in Australia under the Federal Government Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Now, Nillumbik is also known for its diverse orchid population, and if you listen to Lydia's talk the other night, she might have gone into this in more detail. And we have approximately 143 different orchid species that have been recorded. The entire known populations of Rosabella spider orchid, which was on my earlier slide, and charming spider orchid, which is pictured here, are only found in Nillumbik. They're both critically endangered. Also, the majority of known populations of wine-lipped spider orchid are also restricted to the region as well. The Shire also supports several populations of the critically endangered roundleaf pomaderus, which is pictured here as well. And this is a species only known from a small number of populations in the ranges to the north and the east. We also have some really unique fauna. Approximately 377 fauna species have been recorded within the Shire, that's Indigenous fauna species. And Nillumbik supports a high proportion of threatened fauna species as well, with approximately 60 species listed as threatened in Victoria and 17 which are listed as threatened in Australia under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. And this includes an important population of brush-tail phascogale, as well as some of the only populations of the Eltham copper butterfly. The Shire also supports resident populations of several threatened bird species, such as the powerful owl and barking owl, and the occasional visit by threatened migratory birds, such as the Lewins rail, swift parrot, and regent honeyeater. So I've called this slide important species, but only because this is such an interesting topic. When we're speaking about biodiversity, it's such a broad topic in itself. It encompasses all components of the living world. So I've decided tonight to just focus on the species level. And I've titled this slide Important Species only because I think this is something to highlight. Realistically, everything is important. And it's also important to realise that what's important to me might not necessarily be important to you. Now, I've added this picture in, and it's from the United Kingdom, but it demonstrates the complexity around how everything interacts with each other. The species that are here in Nillumbik have evolved to the conditions with the local environment and have adapted to the soils, topography and climate of the local area. They also help to maintain the ecological balance of the local ecosystem. And as plants and animals depend upon one another in an often really complicated relationship. So in many instances, the loss of a particular plant or animal from one area can result in the loss of one other organism in another. And maintaining an ecological balance is really important, and it is a continuous challenge when managing biodiversity. What works well in one area might not work in another. And similarly, what works well for one species might not work for another species. It's really quite complex. Now, because this topic is so broad and because there's so much to focus on, instead I'm going to highlight some more unique species in Nillumbik. And you might know some of these, but I'll also talk about hopefully something that you haven't noticed before or you might not know much about. So first up is our carnivorous plants. Now this is our very spectacular carnivorous plant called Drosera or sundew. And there's two different species in this slide here. We have Drosera aberrans, which is this flat one, and Drosera auriculata, which is this one here. But we have about 6 different Drosera species in Nillumbik. Now they capture prey using the glistening drops of dew on the end of their little tentacles there, and from which the plant derives its common name. Now the insects get trapped, die, and the enzymes secreted by the plant dissolve the insect and the plant absorbs the nutrients. Now these plants are usually found in areas of poor nutrients and occupy small niches in these areas where other plants might find it difficult to grow. Now, there's about 245 species of Drosera distributed discontinuously throughout the world, with the greatest diversity of Drosera occurring in Australia. But these aren't our only carnivorous plants. This is Utricularia australis, or yellow bladderwort, and we also have fairies aprons, which is Utricularia dichotoma. Now, these carnivorous plants grow in wet areas and have a submerged bladder-like trap, which is this here, and this is zoomed in quite a bit. And this trap sucks in small aquatic fauna. Now, what's interesting about this species is the prey is sucked into the traps with 2,800 times the acceleration of gravity, and it's decelerated inside the trap nearly as quickly. It's just super quick. Really special species. The next species I want to highlight is this one here, because our freshwater aquatic or semi-aquatic species don't always get a mention. So this is our largest native rat, or the ricali, or water rat. And it's found wherever there's a reliable watercourse. Now, it is the size and general shape of a small otter with partially webbed hind feet, and it's also commonly known as our Australia's otter too. Now, they use their webbed feet for swimming and burrowing, and they have a thick tail that acts as a rudder and water-repellent fur. Now, ricali can easily be identified by this white-tipped tail and its very large size. They can almost be as big as a medium-sized platypus. They occupy burrows located in creeks and river banks, or they shelter in large hollow logs lying near the water. Now, like an otter, it's a really skilled swimmer, and it feeds mostly on aquatic animals such as crayfish, mussels, insect larvae, mollusks, turtles and fish. They take their prey up to their favourite feeding spot to devour, and they usually find large piles of their leftover shells or bones in these areas. They have these fantastic sensory whiskers on its head, which help them to detect prey in the dark at night. They are a top order predator, in freshwater environments, and they can even take out the occasional duck. Next up is the southern short-fin eel. Now, this is interesting because adult eels migrate huge distances from freshwater rivers to deep ocean spawning grounds in the Coral Sea to breed. The larvae then disperse, metamorphose into glass eels, which then migrate into estuaries before transforming into juvenile eels and make their way back to the rivers and streams from which they came. Now, the juveniles can migrate upstream and can climb vertical moist surfaces, and adults can move over land around stream barriers during wet weather. It's just truly amazing. Now, eels were a really important food source for First Nations people, and they engineered the landscape to create very sophisticated structures such as eel traps, which are evident along the Yarra River. Next up, here is a pretty cool fungi called an earth star. Now, this fungi has a little ball shape in the middle here, and they depend on rain for spore dispersal. The rain hits this ball and the spores puff out of this little hole in the middle. Now, the layers around this ball shape allow the earth star to do something no other fungi can do. Earth stars can move. So when it rains, these outer two layers of the fungi split and uncurl, forming this star shape. And this star-shaped base then pushes down, which helps to push the ball above the leaf litter, maximising the chance that the fruiting body will be hit by rain and helping the spores to disperse. And finally, I'm going to talk about lichen. Now, this is a photo of a crustose lichen and a foliose lichen. It's two different types. And lichens are really unusual in that they are a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae or a cyanobacterium, rather than a species on its own. But in this relationship, one species cannot live without the other. So the algae or the cyanobacterium undertakes the photosynthesis and makes the carbohydrates. And then the fungi creates the anchor, harvests dead or dying material, or even rock, freeing the mineral and water, which the algae converts the food for both. They are early colonisers. So, for example, they are the first to establish after volcanic eruptions. They provide the early stage of weathering in rocks, slowly breaking down the rock and creating soil. And in some lichen species, the fungi can dissolve rock with chemicals to obtain the minerals. They are able to fix atmospheric nitrogen, which becomes available through leaching or decay and can be a significant source of nitrogen for plants. Lichens also absorb mineral nutrients, are a source of food for animals, provide habitat for invertebrates, and can create soil crusts which control erosion and protect soil structures, and they can even capture moisture from dew and fog. They're pretty amazing. So why do we need to protect it? Well, biodiversity is considered by many to have intrinsic value. That is, each species has a value and a right to exist, whether or not it is known to have value to humans. However, biodiversity has very clear values that are important to us. It is our ecological life support. Biodiversity provides functioning ecosystems that supply oxygen, clean air and water, pollination of plants, pest control, wastewater treatment, and many other ecosystem services. Has economic benefits. Biodiversity provides humans with raw materials for consumption and production, and many livelihoods such as those of farmers, fishers, and timber workers are dependent on biodiversity. It has recreational value. Many recreational pursuits rely on our unique biodiversity, such as birdwatching, hiking, camping, and fishing. And our local tourism industry also depends on biodiversity. It has really cultural value. The Australian culture is so closely connected to biodiversity through the expression of identity, through spirituality, and through aesthetic appreciation. Indigenous Australians have a really strong connection and obligation to biodiversity, arising from spiritual beliefs about animals and plants. And it also has scientific benefit. And biodiversity represents such a wealth of systematic ecological knowledge and data that helps us to understand the natural world and its origins. So any loss or deterioration in the condition of biodiversity can compromise all the values that are outlined above, and it can also affect human well-being. So go out and hug a tree and say thank you. I really hope you do. So what can we do? Well, the maintenance of biological diversity really requires much more than the protection of wildlife and habitats in conservation reserves. It serves to promote sustainable use of biological resources, because an environment rich in biodiversity offers the broadest array of options for sustainable economic activity, nurturing human welfare and adapting to change. Now, you can help by protecting the native vegetation on your property, controlling weeds and pest animals, installing nest boxes and retaining hollow logs, planting Indigenous plant species and creating habitat corridors. You can get involved in your local land care group or friends of group. It's a really great way to get outdoors, learn from others, and help your local environment. Now, to help you protect your bushland or to promote a really rich and biodiverse landscape, Nillumbik Shire Council, we want to help. We can provide advice and support, particularly through helping landowners with incentives through our Land Management Incentive Program, where grants are available for works to protect and enhance native vegetation, including fencing, revegetation using Indigenous species, and environmental weed control, just to name a few things. Nillumbik Council also helps to run a Gardens for Wildlife program, which is a partnership between Nillumbik Shire Council and community members to engage the public in creating habitat gardens for local wildlife. Now, the program offers a garden visit to local residents from 2 of our trained volunteer garden guides, and they will provide encouragement and guidance on how to provide habitat for wildlife through gardening on private property. And you can look on our website on more information on the Land Management Incentive Program and Gardens Wildlife Program. You can also help to protect our native flora and fauna by placing a Trust for Nature Conservation Covenant on your title, or by participating in the Land for Wildlife Program through the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. At Council, we're all about working together with the landowner to achieve a common goal. We are also there to help increase the landowner's knowledge and to ensure that remnant areas of vegetation are seen as important areas. However, good ecosystem management really relies on having really good information about what is out there in our environment. And that's why Nillumbik Council is participating in the Great Southern BioBlitz. Now, the Great Southern BioBlitz is the largest citizen science biological survey across the Southern Hemisphere. And it'll help in Nillumbik. It'll help all of us to discover the native biota. On the 21st of August at 12:30 p.m, I'll be running another presentation to introduce the Great Southern BioBlitz and how to use iNaturalist, and including ways to help you discover some native plants and animals found in Nillumbik, how to find them, and how to have fun doing so. So please, in the meantime, if you're interested in getting involved, download iNaturalist and log on to your account. Join the Nillumbik Great Southern BioBlitz project by going to Projects Great Southern BioBlitz 2021, Nillumbik Shire, and make observations over the collection period, which is the 22nd to the 25th of October. And that will add to our count, and hopefully we'll win the competition too. Now, to just wrap up, finally, look, I'm sure you all agree that apart from the bigger benefits of protecting biodiversity, if you found this adorable baby wombat in your backyard, or this really cute brush-tailed phascogale in one of your trees, you would want to protect their habitat too. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Julia. That was terrific. Some great insights and information for people to contemplate and ways to take action so that we can all preserve what we have and reinvigorate our precious environment. Fantastic. Has anybody got a question that Julia could answer? You've got something in the chat. What is involved with having a trust for nature on one's property?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's worth contacting Trust for Nature just to see, firstly, if your property will qualify. I think a lot of the qualifications to have a Trust for Nature covenant on title has changed a fair bit. But I think Nillumbik's one of their priority areas, so tick for that. When I used to work for them a long time ago, and when I was there, I think a property had to be over 2 hectares in size and have a certain area of bushland as well. And you would contact the regional manager for the area. So in this instance, the Port Phillip and Western Port regional manager for Trust for Nature, and his name is Ben Cullen. And he should be able to give you some more information about that. But essentially, if it sort of qualifies from their end, they'll do a site visit and map it out for the property owner, and then they will put together the legal agreement, and as long as you agree to that, then you can sign that, and that gets endorsed by the state government. So that's essentially the process. Can take a long time, but yeah, worth getting in touch with Trust for Nature to see if it qualifies.
It's a really worthwhile cause, absolutely, and it has led to the protection of a lot of land.
And I should also add, council also offer a rate rebate for any Trust for Nature covenanted properties as well. So that always helps in Nillumbik.
Thank you. Someone is asking if you've got any comments on consumer and commercial items flushed into our waterways versus waterway critters. So,
yeah, that's an interesting one. So I suppose is the question more around the impact of that on aquatic species, or?
My guess is so, but if the person can extrapolate, but I assume there is concern about how much goes down. So whether it's from anything from medications to chemicals to industrial waste and runoff from roads, etc.
Absolutely. Our aquatic systems really take a beating from us, from a whole range of things, microplastics to even, unfortunately, hand sanitizer. There's been some studies recently about the increase in use of hand sanitizer and how that impacts on good bacteria. But, we also have to protect ourselves. So it's a bit of a catch-22. It's pretty unfortunate. There's lots of cosmetics that have microplastics within them that people just wouldn't be aware of, and that washes down into our ecosystems and can cause some really big impacts. So it's not great.
And is there a department in council if we wanted to lobby for some improvements?
Probably not a department in council per se, but it's worth actually raising those sorts of issues with organisations like Melbourne Water, who do a lot of work in our rivers and creeks and have the main management they're the main management authority in our region. So it's worth raising it with them. It's also worth raising it with the state government, whoever you think might listen, really.
We'll keep going. There's a lot of questions here.
Okay, good.
Does council help with the control of pest animals, for example, deer and rabbits?
And yes, we
increasing
absolutely
in population.
Yes, we do. rabbits at the moment more so than deer. And when we do assist with rabbit control, we prefer to have more properties on board than just one property at a time, purely because if you're only looking at a singular property with control works, with pest animals, you're just going to get reinvasion. So the more property owners in a region that we can get on board, the better. And then we can have a more coordinated effect on pest animal control. We're trying to do the same with deer. We ran a more targeted deer control approach up and around Sugarloaf Reservoir. So, and that was around Christmas Hills and Bend of Islands, and that was really successful. It was state government funded, so that funding has now ceased. But council really willing to continue that type of project. So we're really looking at, I guess, once again, more broader landscapes and getting a lot more property owners involved in pest animal control. But yes, we do fund pest animal control, and we'll take it on a case-by-case basis.
Have you found, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay, go on.
Have you found with the culling of deer, is it maintained, like do you have to keep culling, or does it actually make a difference? Don't they just keep coming back in?
They can, yeah. Look, any sort of pest animal control is really useful on an ongoing basis. But in saying that, any control is better than no control with deer, particularly because they're such prolific breeders. So yeah, it's good to just get on top of any of it, really.
And the damage they cause from their hooves and rubbing trees is extensive. Yeah, we see it regularly. Any comments on sky bridges and other bridges along linear reserves such as the Diamond Creek for big?
Yeah, I think they're really useful where the species are. So you have to make sure that the species that you're managing for are actually there. Otherwise, you're installing these structures for no real gain, I suppose. So if, say, for instance, for sugar gliders, they're really beneficial when crossing, roads, for instance, or, we've seen them used across some freeways up in the north of Victoria, and they're really beneficial when put, say Vic roads, for instance, are putting in a new or widening a new road or something. They really help to allow species to move from one area to another. I think they're really good, but you just have to make sure that what you're installing them for, the species are actually there. And you also need to ensure that there's maintenance on those structures as well. So ongoing funding is important.
And are they things that council would be responsible for, or Vic roads, or?
Yeah, once again, depending on the project. So if it's a roads project and it's been funded by Vic Roads, and generally Vic Roads tend to follow up with that maintenance. If it's a council project, then it'll be council. So it really depends on the type of project. Yeah.
Okay, great. Can you talk a bit more about the BioBlitz, who's running it and why it's important, the difference it will make, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. So the BioBlitz is a citizen science project, and essentially the way I see it is it's important in engaging people to get out in the environment and to understand it more. The functionality of iNaturalist, which is the platform that the Great Southern BioBlitz is using, is just amazing. Like, you can put a photo of a plant on there and just call it plant. And the real benefit of it is that you have people on the program that are knowledgeable and can ID it for you pretty much instantly if they're on at the same time. So it's a fantastic platform to try and learn and to get people out in nature. And And I guess that's what the Great Southern Bioblitz is all about. It's about getting people out and understanding more about what's out there. It's also a really good project because it gives us a snapshot in time as well. And collectively, you get more effort using a citizen science tool like this because you've got multiple people out all at the same time, and you can verify those records and other people can verify those records, and you just get all this really fantastic knowledge exchange and data exchange. And the also great thing about it is that it's open source data, so anybody can access it. It's not hidden in the background or anything like that. Some records can be set as private if that's, you know, for instance, if it's a threatened species or something like that. But, you know, knowledge is knowledge. It allows us to do so much and to plan as well. So, yeah, I'm really excited about it, actually.
Yeah, so we're really focusing with the people's backyards in a way. We're trying to encourage people to do that, so that for numerous reasons, one of the most significant being it's a place where we all have some level of control over, and really to find a way to use the BioBlitz to gather information, make decisions about how you might want to proceed in reinvigorating a space or protecting what's there, removing weeds, identifying what's what, and really seeing significant transformation. And you've got a talk on the Thursday, I think the
21st.
At lunchtime, and
Yes.
people can go to the Nillumbik Council website, the Spring Outdoors program, to find that. And we're going to be hosting a forum probably that evening to expand in a different way from that. So, you know, you'll get all the nitty-gritty of how to use iNaturalist and all those sorts of things from Julia, and then we'll be having another forum which we'll put on the website about, you know, how you can make use of that opportunity. Somebody is asking, can you talk a little bit about the fungi orchid wasp symbiotic relationship?
Yay, definitely. Yeah, this is one of my my little pet loves. A bit of an orchid nut. So I'll actually talk about the charming spider orchid, which is what I had a picture of earlier. And most Caledonia species, so most spider orchids have this relationship, whether it's a wasp or a bee. But in the charming spider orchid, they have a relationship with a wasp, which pollinates the species. Now, it's kind of hard. Where do I start? So orchids have a symbiotic relationship with fungi. I'll start with the fungi. Now, in order for orchid seeds to be germinate, sorry, I had to think of the word. In order for orchid seeds to germinate, they need to have this symbiotic relationship with the fungi, because the orchid seeds are so small and dust-like that they don't have the food resources within the actual seed itself. So it forms this symbiotic relationship with, you know, a really specific type of fungi in the soil. Fungi helps to feed the seed, and then the seed can germinate. Not quite sure what the fungi gets out of it. You know, it's possible that the fungi benefits when the orchids start to photosynthesize, but I think the orchids get the better half of the relationship in this regard. So coming back to the wasps help to pollinate the orchids, but the wasp also has other relationships as well. So wasp is really important for the orchid, but in order for the wasp to be around, it has to have certain plants. So certain flowering plants that help attract the wasp to the area where the orchid is, and the orchid also attracts the wasp, depending. Some are some are attracted by pheromones, others are attracted by, you know, looking kind of like the sexual reproduction organs, or like the actual female wasp and that type of thing. It's all very, yeah, interesting. But the wasps also need, so when it comes to the charming spider orchid, the wasps also need a beetle larvae. And I can't remember off the top of my head which species the beetle is. Oh, sorry, I just saw someone's comment. It's Saturday night after all. I love that. So thank you. Yeah, so the wasp also needs a larvae, and a beetle larvae, and it uses the beetle larvae to, I think it's prey for the female wasp. So it uses it to feed the female wasp. And the beetle requires native grasses, so then it can lay its larvae. And so it's all this really intricate web of species interacting with other species. And, you know, managing for orchids is truly complex. It's, yeah, phenomenal.
It is. It's fantastic. And it goes to show that's the importance of biodiversity, which is not, you know, we just love one plant. It requires a whole system around it within the whole place to function.
Exactly.
And we might see if we can gather some details, papers that people might be interested in reading, and we'll send everyone who's here today, we'll send those out for people to look at if they want. Someone's asking, where does Nillumbik rank in the list of Australia's most biodiverse regions?
Oh, I'm not sure. That's a really great question. Maybe something that I can look for. I know in Victoria, we're really diverse compared to some other areas. Yeah, we're up there, particularly with our plant species. But I don't know the rankings, unfortunately. Maybe something I can find out.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, probably our most diverse areas in Australia would be our rainforests. So you'd be looking at areas in tropical North Queensland. They're just incredible with the level of species diversity in those areas. But yeah, we don't do too bad in Nillumbik. Pretty special.
Yeah, and Southwest WA is pretty incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
But yeah, we've got plenty here, and certainly a lot more that can be brought back. That's for sure. Somebody's asking, you mentioned insects. Any large studies reported for Nillumbik? We were surprised to see scorpions seek shelter in our house after heavy rains. Then surprised to see that they're local to Melbourne, which is
absolutely
the case. I lifted a bucket today, and sure enough, there were 2 little scorpions.
It's always a bit of a shock. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
It's insects are probably one of our least studied species, not just in Nillumbik but across the world. And there's so many species of insects that we just don't know anything about. But yeah, it's amazing. Like, yes, we do have scorpions in Nillumbik, and not everybody knows that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, they're quite small, really.
And they're tiny.
They're not killer scorpions.
No, but they hurt.
They hurt.
They do hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just incredible. So, you know, even with this Great Southern BioBlitz, you know, if people can take more insects, that would be amazing. Like, you know, you never know what we might find.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And with Nillumbio, we're looking into particular projects that we might investigate. And so, you know, we might send out a call to say, everybody, you know, send us photos of your insects or whatever else that might be worth collecting, because there is not that much data really to demonstrate.
Not at all.
No.
Exactly.
Which relates to a question someone's asking about the decline of biodiversity in Nillumbik. And I know from personal experience of living here for a long time, it's distressing, it's really shocking, alarming. The reduction of insects, impacts of deer and rabbits, urbanisation, illegal clearing of vegetation, altered fire regimes, reducing biodiversity. So they're asking, has the situation worsened? In some ways, definitely. But there's always hope.
There is always hope. That's right, Vicky. And yeah, it's really unfortunate. It has declined, and it's not just in Nillumbik. It's declining in Australia and across the globe. You know, the most recent State of the Environment report in Australia was just heartbreaking. But we need to keep on championing what we have, and you know, by doing projects like what we're doing and what Nillumbio are doing, you know, will hopefully highlight how important this area really is. You know, it benefits so much, and not just for other species, it benefits us as humans as well. And, you know, the more that we can spread the word about that, the better. I think in some circumstances, people just are really disconnected and maybe don't understand the values that they have. So, you know, we can only try our best and do what we can, and keep on educating and trying to really highlight the beautiful place that we live in.
Yeah, that's
I don't live in Nillumbik. I wish I did, but I feel like I do.
Every bit counts, and, you know,
yes,
we can all do something and have, you know, more difficult conversations with people who might not be aware of the importance of preserving biodiversity. You know, we can all do something, which is really terrific.
Yeah.
Someone is asking for a particular weed, onion weed. You can eat it. Controlling onion weed, which is spreading very rapidly down road culverts and into properties, crowding out all other species. Maybe we should all start eating it.
Yeah, I didn't know that you could eat it. I go near it and recoil. The smell is intense. But yeah, you're right. Like it's a really nasty weed in our you know, wetter areas, and we don't, you know, if we don't know at council, then we can't do anything. So, you know, let us know where it is. We'll see if we can prioritise it and help to control it, because that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we're prioritising areas that need weed control. But if we don't know where the weeds are, then it makes it really hard. So if it's on private land, then we can assist with our land management incentive program if it meets our guidelines. And if it's on our road reserves, or if it's in our public areas, then, you know, we can look at other ways in which we can hopefully control it. Also, you know, obvious constraints with budgets and that type of thing, but yeah, we can always do the best we can. So we're here to help. Yeah. But yeah, it's a nasty weed.
Yeah, and Nillumbik is also going to be really investigating a weed mapping project, not just environmental weeds, but, you know, all sorts of different things. So we'll keep you posted on that as well. Somebody's asking, how can we as residents support the work of the biodiversity environment team at council? What helps you to get other council departments get on board with prioritising biodiversity?
Yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you. We always like to have some support for our department. Make your voice heard, to be honest. I think have the conversations with your local member, have the conversations with us, highlight the fact that you know, really care for your environment. I think that's probably one of our, you know, greatest supports that we could probably have, because if we don't understand or don't know if people care about it, then, you know, we don't also get our voice heard internally. So I guess that, yeah, just really do that. And, you know, let us know as well what's important to you. And, you know, we can always build it into our priorities as well. So, yeah, thank you. That's really, really lovely. Yeah.
Great. There are more questions. How does council manage the conflict between protecting biodiversity and managing bushfire risk in built-up areas?
Yeah, it's a really challenging one. It's not easy. We have to manage for both. We have to manage, you know, for people's amenity and safety, as well as to manage for biodiversity. And it strikes a really difficult balance, but it can be done. And we try to work really closely with the emergency management team to ensure that whatever works are being done for fire mitigation also take into consideration biodiversity and biodiversity values. So that's something that our team does in our positions and our roles. So we're definitely working in the background, even though you might not see it, to, yeah, do what we can to strike that balance. But yeah, it's challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's extensive research really coming out now, isn't there, to discuss the importance of maintaining a healthy environment that actually doesn't increase bushfire risk, and how to contend with all those different variables. Somebody is asking, how does one know when a place, say a backyard or location, for example, Nillumbik, has reached a healthy level of biodiversity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose that comes back to my point about what's important to me might not be important to you. When we look at a healthy ecosystem, we really want, we kind of have some benchmarks that we try to aim for. But in saying that, it depends on what you're managing for as well. So if you're managing for a threatened species, for instance, say a threatened orchid, your management is going to look totally different if you're managing, say, for instance, if you're managing for, you know, maybe common dunnart or something like that. I don't know. Like it's probably a pretty poor example, but I guess you want to, I suppose, ensure that your weed levels are down really low. That's probably one of the main things, that your diversity in the area is high. So diversity of Indigenous species, because those species are really well adapted to, you know, the soils and all that type of thing, and have amazing interactions with other species and that we don't see, like the soil fungi and that type of thing. And so that really complex web that Indigenous species has, you know, can really benefit other things. So weed control is really important, and keeping weed levels down really low is really important. If you're managing for Indigenous fauna, then, you know, a healthy ecosystem would, you know, look like something that doesn't have pest animal species in it, for instance. So it really just depends on what you're managing for and what area you're in and all that. So yeah, it's a complex question to answer, because what's a healthy ecosystem to me? Well, to have no weeds, it would have maximum amount of species diversity that area can hold. You know, what did an area look like pre-European settlement? Well, I have no idea. We can only kind of guess, I suppose, and there's some pretty good guesses in terms of what it looks like, and some benchmark areas that we try to make areas look like, but everything's really dynamic, and yeah, it's really complex, but I think a healthy ecosystem is one with very low weeds or no weeds and good diversity in Indigenous species.
Yeah, and insects, I think, are a really good indicator.
Definitely.
If you've got an abundance of insects, you usually have also birds, and it's a good indicator that they have food to keep going. And yeah, which also relates to another question. Could you say a bit more about some important indicator species in Nillumbik?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think a lot of our orchids are really good indicator species, but some of them are sort of naturally rare anyways in the landscape. So most of our drier areas, our drier vegetation areas, would have supported native orchids or a really good diversity of native orchids. Other indicator species, I think, will probably be some of our pea species as well. And a lot of them have gone missing because of deer browsing. So, yeah, that's a really clear sign that things are going a bit awry at the moment in Nillumbik. Other indicator species. I think in some of our aquatic areas, platypus are a really good indicator species in terms of the health of that ecosystem, and ricali are as well, because they're both top order predators. But yeah, the fact that we've still got platypus in Diamond Creek is a really good sign. But you know, some of our other creeks probably would have supported that species as well, and it's just not there or declining. The populations are declining in those areas. So yeah, I think that's a few.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could,
we could keep going, and we might just take 2 more questions, and then we might have to call it a night. If we alert council to a weed, will they just blast it with Roundup? What is council policy on Roundup? And that relates to another question, which is, with what is council's policy around herbicide or pesticide usage? Obviously, we need to deal with weeds, but is there consideration around the presence and concentration of toxins in the environment?
Really? Yeah, absolutely. We always want to be really sensitive when we're managing weeds. So, for instance, when we're giving advice on weed control, we don't always tend to, go for the herbicides, for instance. It just depends on what you need to control. I know that council's potentially putting up a policy on glyphosate use, which should be coming up soon, I think. So just watch that space in terms of how that, I guess, pans out. But we're not necessarily looking at just blasting things here and there with chemicals. Every sort of weed species needs a different type of control technique. So whether that is herbicide use, in some instances there's no other choice, or if it's mechanical removal or hand weeding, or there's a whole range of techniques that we do use at council and that we do prefer to use, particularly in some real sensitive areas like in or near waterways as well. So
is council investigating steam weeders and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was interesting. I read a paper recently about the use of steam, I think it was steam wands, and they actually had a really significant negative effect on like the microorganisms in soil. So once again, it's, there's no clear good technique, so to speak. when it comes to using those types of things. So it's really trying to strike a good balance, I suppose. But
and
there's no easy answer.
Yeah, that's right. And usually the best practice, which is hand weeding, is the most labour intensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you know, requires enormous amounts of hours of people, which you know, worth considering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But how many people in Nillumbik? Quite a few. And the last question: when is council going to review its biodiversity policy?
Yeah, so that's on the cards to be reviewed. The biodiversity strategy, which was created in 2012, I think, and that's how long I've been at Nillumbik. Next year we're looking at reviewing the biodiversity strategy and updating that. So that may or may not be incorporated into a more broader environment strategy. So it might include the invasive species strategy as well. But yeah, we're just waiting to nut that out, but that'll definitely be on the cards for next year.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here and for posing your questions. And thank you, Julia, for, you know, terrific information, answers, you know,
no worries.
Fantastic. And we'll certainly be in touch with you all again regarding the BioBlitz and other actions via email and via the website. So, and do have a look at that talk that is happening on the Thursday before the BioBlitz on Council's website. Thank you, and see you maybe at the next forum. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.